We got two tales today. Let's go to the first one.
I'd had a thing for Nellie since middle school. We talked a few times and she was always nice, but kept her distance, like she wasn't interested in getting close. When we reconnected during my second to last year of high school, I got my hopes up again, only for them to be crushed. She didn't feel the same way, always coming up with excuses to leave. I never outright told her how I felt, but I think she knew. She just didn't want to give me a chance. In my last year of high school, I finally worked up the nerve to tell her I liked her and asked her out. She rejected me, saying she wanted to focus on her studies and didn't want to date anyone. I felt crushed, but at least I got it off my chest. Even though it sucked, I was at peace knowing I'd tried. Then just 2 days later, I found out she was seeing another guy from school. At graduation, she showed up with him, and it turned out they were dating. That stung, but I handled it okay. She didn't owe me anything, and I figured she'd just made up the study excuse to spare my feelings. I moved on and we lost touch for years. I started engineering school but dropped out during my second year. A friend of mine got a passport and visa to visit the US, and I decided to tag along. The plan was to spend 15 days in Orlando, practicing English and visiting his aunt. But the moment I arrived, I was hooked. Something about the way life seemed so achievable here pulled me in, and I decided not to leave. I worked all kinds of jobs, but eventually landed one I loved and paid well. Gardening. 7 years flew by. I was doing great and was close to getting my legal status sorted out. I missed my mom and brother a lot, but leaving the US undocumented wasn't an option. Social media became my lifeline to stay connected. One day I got a friend request from Nellie. I hadn't seen her in years, but recognized that smile immediately. I accepted her request without expecting much, but she started messaging me constantly, commenting on my photos and telling me how lucky I was to live in the US. We started talking more, even doing video calls. She opened up about her rough patch. She'd been divorced for a year and lost custody of her son to her ex, a police officer she claimed lied to the court. Nellie was fascinated by my stories and started confiding in me that she really wanted to a fresh start in America. I gave her advice about getting a visa, but when her application was denied, she was devastated. She cried to me and eventually mentioned a sketchy way to get into the country. I warned her it was risky and probably a scam, but she wouldn't drop it. She started reminiscing about school, saying she regretted rejecting me and how she only ever met losers back then. She really laid it on thick, and I didn't see through it. Eventually, I agreed to help. I even offered to let her stay with me and help her get a job. But soon it became clear she also needed money. The fee for her plan was huge, most of my savings. She swore she'd pay me back, and I believed her. When Nellie arrived, she hugged and kissed me right away. I was over the moon. We started living together, but the honeymoon phase didn't last long. I got her 3 jobs, and she quit all of them. Cleaning houses? She said the products made her sick. A restaurant? She hated the hours. A laundromat where all she had to do was help people with machines? She said it wasn't fulfilling. It became clear to me that no matter how many jobs I found for Nellie, she wouldn't stay in any. We started arguing because she wasn't working and wouldn't be able to pay me back. She accused me of threatening her and then just packed up and left. Turns out she'd made friends in a Facebook group and moved in with someone else. On top of that, she spread lies about me, claiming I took her money when she worked, which she didn't. After that scam, I started feeling ashamed of myself. I ended up moving because it affected me so much. That period was really tough for me. Eventually, I found out she was living with another guy who supported her entirely. For some reason, she never blocked me on social media though, so I kept tabs. At first, I wanted revenge but focused on legalizing my status instead. After a year, I finally did it. Once I was secure, I anonymously reported her illegal entry. A while later, her social media went silent. Word got around she and her boyfriend had been deported. At first, I worried she'd connect the dots and try to get back at me by reporting that I'd helped her initially. But nothing happened. Maybe she just didn't care anymore, or she didn't figure out it was me. The immigrant community often discourages reporting others, but looking back, I don't regret it. I lost $30,000 and she had no intention of paying me back. She burned her bridges and her actions had consequences. People like her rarely get ahead for long. I believe she had no place in a country where she sought to exploit others. It was a tough lesson, but I came out stronger. Now I'm focused on building a better, more honest life.
And now to the second tale. In 2014, I left my country with one goal: to reach the United States and stay there for at least 5 years. My plan was to save enough money to buy a house and open a business, something to build a stable life when I returned. At that time, I was 25 years old, and my journey began in Mexico. I took the unofficial way of entering the United States, if you know what I mean. I know it's wrong, but I was trying to build a better life for myself and my family. Along the way, I met a 23-year-old woman named Salma. When she overheard me speaking on the phone with my brother, she started crying and staring at me. When I finished the call, she told me she was terrified and desperate, as she had already faced situations where men harassed her with obscene gestures and inappropriate advances. When she realized I was from the same country, she felt relieved. She was also heading to the U.S. and asked if she could stick with me. I said yes. Salma was a very beautiful woman, and unfortunately, in that environment, beauty could be dangerous. Some Mexican men, and the so-called coyotes, were known to be dangerous. There were horrifying stories of women trying to cross the border who disappeared and never made it back. The first thing I did was ask Salma to change her clothes. She had a curvy figure and wore outfits that accentuated her shape, which drew too much attention. Since she didn't have more modest clothing, I gave her one of my pants. I remember us laughing a lot that day. She looked like a man, especially after I gave her a cap to complete the disguise. As the journey continued, we got to know each other and became friends. I enjoyed her company, and by pretending to be with me, she avoided much of the harassment she had been experiencing. Even so, I would never recommend that a woman take that route alone. Salma and I traveled together for days, sleeping on streets, in makeshift shelters, and even in the Mexican desert. She shared her story with me, telling me about her 2-year-old son left in her parents' care. Her boyfriend had abandoned her right after their child was born. A friend had invited her to the United States to work and live in Orlando, where she would work as a house cleaner. I told her I was heading to New Jersey, also at a friend's invitation, and planned to work in whatever job I could find. We faced many struggles together, but managed to cross the border. Once we arrived, the plan was to go our separate ways. My friend was already waiting for me, but Salma's friend didn't show up. Once again, I saw her desperate and crying. My friend lent her his phone so she could call her contact. She stepped away, visibly nervous, and made the call. From a distance, we saw her gesturing and holding her head in despair. Eventually, she hung up and came back to us, saying her friend had talked to her husband, and he didn't approve of hosting Salma, despite everything having been arranged months prior. Her friend simply apologized and hung up. I thought it was incredibly cruel. How could someone convince her to leave her country with promises of help, only to abandon her in such a situation? I convinced my friend to let her come with us temporarily, at least until she could find a job and a place to live. So once we settled, I started working at a pizzeria in Jersey, doing everything from washing dishes to deliveries. Through my friend's connections, Salma found work at a nearby restaurant. After about 2 months, it was time to leave my friend's place. He had already helped us so much, including taking in someone he didn't know because I asked him to. Salma and I decided to rent a small room together. Up until that point, our relationship had been purely a friendship. But once we started living alone, things began to change. She started flirting with me, and before we knew it, we were in a romantic relationship. We stayed focused on our goals of saving money. Our days together were peaceful. Life was stable, and we got along well. I found a better-paying job in construction, and Salma began cleaning houses, which also paid more. Things went well for nearly 2 years until I discovered that she was cheating on me. A Mexican co-worker of mine, who was married to a Cuban woman working for the same agency that connected Salma to cleaning jobs, pulled me aside. He told me he had seen Salma kissing some Puerto Rican in a car. This guy was serious and religious, not someone prone to meddling or spreading gossip. He wasn't even a close friend of mine, but said he felt I didn't deserve to be treated that way, given how hard I worked. At first I doubted him, but I decided to follow Salma, and he was right. She had been unfaithful, and it seemed like it had been going on for some time. I waited for her at home. Confronting her in public wasn't an option, fearing immigration issues. When she arrived, I told her someone had told me she was unfaithful. She denied it at first, but confessed when I told her I had followed her. She started crying and justified her actions by saying I worked too much and didn't spend enough time having fun. She said a lot of absurd things that weren't even true. We broke up. She didn't seem to care much, packed her things, and left. Suddenly, I found myself alone, responsible for the rent and all the bills we used to split. I moved to a smaller place to cut costs and carried on with my life. Time passed. I was succeeding in my goal, living in a more comfortable place and even sending money to my family. 3 years had gone by since I arrived in the U.S., and it had been a year since the last time I'd seen Salma. I only knew she was living with that Puerto Rican guy. At an immigrant community event in Jersey, I unexpectedly ran into her. He approached me with a sad, worn-out look and asked me how I was. After some small talk, she apologized and said she always felt terrible because I did so much for her. She said she had changed and truly wished me the best. I kept my response short. Look, Salma, everything that happened between us is in the past. I hope you move on and find peace, okay? Then I walked away to avoid giving her any opening for further conversation. Later, someone who knew her told me she was in a tough spot. Apparently, the Puerto Rican man had scammed her, taking all her savings. It was clear she was as desperate as the day I first met her in Mexico. She kept looking at me throughout the event, following me around, seemingly trying to muster the courage to talk to me again. When I realized this, I left the party to avoid any drama. She called me several times afterward, but I didn't answer and eventually blocked her. About 6 months later, I heard she had returned to our country. Apparently, she had no choice. After being scammed, she couldn't afford rent and ended up being deported after her landlord reported her. She returned just as she had arrived in the U.S. with nothing.
That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this tale. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts. There is another suggestion of a video right now on your screen. Consider watching it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future tales. Until next time, keep dreaming.